something, existence in the world. There is an illocution, which is my meaning for that statement. And then there's also perlocution, because I want you to do something because of it. Now, a speech act theorist says this annoyingly detailed bunch of language is useful for taking apart what goes on in conversations. Because you now ask yourself the question, instead of when someone says to you, hey, you know, I'm hungry. You begin to think about utterance, proposition, illocution, and perlocution. Go ahead.
What are these components in the language pragmatism that's used in journalism to build articles?
I don't know that.
Oh,
okay. Is it?
Yes.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, but
Right. Go ahead.
Yeah, just so I get this straight, is perlocution an expectation, or is that just a desire?
Let me make sure I get the distinction right. All right, so let's take a look at it. Perlocution. Let's begin with the difference between illocution and perlocution. An illocution is an act in which the speaker's primary concern is that the listener understand the intention. So I'm reading right now. Because it is a fine distinction, right? So that you understand the intention. That you intend, I'm making a promise, I'm giving an invitation, I'm making a request, or whatever it is. So I want you to know I made a request or an invitation. A perlocution is an act in which the speaker expects the listener not only to understand the intention, but to act on it. So it's that edge of not only that you understand I made the invitation, but I want you to do something with it. So he says, if you say, I am thirsty, with the intention of having your brother understand that you need something to drink, you are performing an illocution. If you also want him to bring you a Diet Coke, he says, you are delivering a perlocutionary act. In the speech act literature, this example is called an indirect request, which is both illocutionary and perlocutionary. So, I'm thirsty. What just happened? I made an utterance. I stated a proposition of fact. I expressed an intention. And I want you to bring me something to drink. But all those may not be the case in any given speech act. So if I say to you, nice day out, you know, that may be just an utterance. You know, that may be, the act there is just a greeting. You know, I don't mean for you to get me a coat or something, you know. So you have to work with what's going on in language. And speech act theory helps especially around understanding what goes on in indirect requests, which we use socially because there are rules about saving face, there are rules about politeness. You know, the "are you hungry" example works because of the cultural understanding that in some cultural settings, for a woman to ask about food is a bad thing. So you have to understand it and you have to act on it. So that works in terms of illocution and perlocution in that setting. He goes on to say here, the real question is not whether the statement is true, but the question is, what is the speaker intending to do by uttering a proposition? So here are some examples that Little John gives, and we'll take a moment with this. So someone says, the cake is good. Right? So that's an utterance. It's a proposition. Now, what are the possible illocutions that are connected to my saying the cake is good?
Understand that you want some more.
Okay, so it could be the beginning of an indirect request that is a perlocution, which means I want some more. Can you think of other contexts where it would have a different intention?
You might be saying that the rest of the meal was lousy.
Right.
You know,
Right.
Don't give me any
The cake is good.
Right.
Right. So it could be intending to compare.
It could be I've had enough.
Okay.
I don't like cake, and that's what I have to say to people.
To make them stop giving it to you.
Cake is good. You don't need to give me any more. I've already tasted it. Yeah, so your intention, and so a speech act theorist would say you have both a illocution and a perlocution. That you're enacting an indirect speech request, an indirect request, and you're doing it in a socially acceptable way of maintaining face. You're not saying to somebody, I don't like cake and I don't want any of your cake. Right?
Also maybe just like as a compliment for other stuff, like, you know, like, oh, the cake was good. And then kind of like to prime them for, like, you're going to ask for something else or like in the future. Okay,
so it could be a setup.
Yeah.
And or it could be your little sister made the cake and you want to compliment her. So far we've got, it could be a request, it could be a stop order, it could be a setup, it could be a... So speech act theory helps us to investigate by using this language, what's going on in statements. So speech act theory has a lot of language for analysis that you can use. I don't know if you find this useful, but you will find it useful at times when you're trying to figure out what's going on here. You know, what's going on? And so you just start to take it apart, and it begins to make some sense. There also, you get 5 kinds of illocutionary acts. This is page 113 in the book. You know, your illocutions can be a 5. He also talks about performative speech acts, which is a judge saying, I sentence you to 400 days in prison. That is a performative act because in the very saying of it, the action is so. Right? And so there are rules for performative speech acts. And so speech act theorists like to go through all these rules, that there has to be the appropriate relationships that exist between the people, and there has to be the proper understanding between each people about what's going on. And so they will elucidate all of the felicity conditions, or the happiness, the right conditions for a performative speech act to function. So, you know, clergy, when they say, I pronounce you husband and wife, you know, that's a performative speech act because it calls into existence the thing which it says. But a speech act theorist would say, well, let me check whether all of the felicity conditions were in place in order for that to be valid. So when you do that in theater, the felicity conditions are not enacted for that to be an actual performative speech act, because there's not the proper relationships that exist between the people, there's not the proper authority that has been committed by society to that person. So why isn't it as valid there as it is in here? Speech act theory says because the felicity conditions are met in one place, but they're not met in another place. Yeah, so they have felicity conditions for promises too. When does a promise, you know, and for instance, he says this, okay, a promise is a promise, here's it must include a sentence indicating that the speaker will do a future act. First felicity condition. Second felicity condition. The utterance only counts as a promise if the listener prefers that the speaker do the act rather than not do it. So it's only a otherwise it's a threat. If I prefer you not do it, it's no longer a promise. It is a threat, or a, I don't know what, a slight or some. But a speech act theorist will say if it doesn't meet these 5 conditions, it's not a promise, or it's not a performative speech act. I mean, a lot of analytic framework here to work with. You know, I mean, it's a big screen, but it gives you a lot of ways to do stuff with language. So in the 5 types of illocutionary acts, these are just of interest, so I'll take a minute with these. He says, on the one hand, you have assertives. I intend to say that this is so. So I've made an utterance, I've made a proposition, and I intend to assert that this is the case. So it's an assertive illocution. My intention is to do that. So he says it can also be a directive. You know, I intend to attempt to get you to do something, and which is likely to mean that this is also perlocution. A commissive, that I intend to commit myself to do something. So in your analysis, so if you're doing a conversation analysis, you know, line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, in your speech act, doing a speech act analysis, you can say in turn 3, we see speaker A making a illocutionary commissive speech act, you know, which may look like a request, but it's actually a statement of commitment to do. So that's how it would read in a conversation analysis. So you have a commissive and expressives. I intend to express how I'm angry, I'm welcoming, I'm thanking, I'm apologizing, and then a declaration. Yeah. So you're fired is a declaration. So that's a form of performative speech act. But it's also an elocution because that is the intention of declaring something to be the case. Not just asserting it, but making it so. So this is a lot of language. And part of what speech act theorists want to say is that all speech acts can be described in this scheme. So this is comprehensive, that everything fits into this. You know, and so you can do your analysis on the basis of that. So why in the world would you want to be this detailed about taking apart sentences and people's statements?
If you're studying a you know, if you're studying a conversation and it's on paper and you're studying it in great detail for significance, you know, you would need a wider range of language to be sure that that you were describing it correctly.
Okay, if a conversation is a social accomplishment, and we're having trouble with people being able to have a conversation, do we have a way to describe in detail what goes on in conversations so that we can say, all right, here's what's going wrong with this conversation. This person is making an expressive, and this person thinks they're making a declaration. I mean, now we have language to describe it. You know, to go back to the suicide bomber thing, the terrorism thing. You know, if somebody says, you know, I believe in this. All right, let's just say I believe in holy war. I believe in jihad. Somebody says. All right, now a speech act theorist is not at all sure what that means. Is that's an utterance, it's a proposition, but I'm trying to figure out what the intention of it is. Am I, as a speaker, meaning to assert that this is the case? Or am I making a claim on you about this? You know, and that would only be known by the context. Is this something I'm expressing, or am I declaring something that I'm going to be involved in, or am I just giving expression to my psychological state? Makes a big difference. But the statement is the same statement, whether it's a declarative or an expressive statement. So I would need to go further to understand, as a speech person, I would say, let me understand, do you mean to say this is expressive of how you feel, or your state, or is this a declaration of your intention to act in a certain way? Because the speech act itself is unclear, or it's multiply meaning. Right? Yeah.
So, I've never read it, but I always hear, historians saying, Mein Kampf was actually pretty much a blueprint. He was making a declaration. Here's what I think, and here's what I'm going to do.
Right.
But people
took it as an expressive. Right. If we take it as an expressive.
Yeah.
Right. So it makes a big difference whether we think someone was making an expressive statement or a declarative statement.
It's not just passing the time in prison,
Hey.
writing something.
Right. Is this the way I feel, or is this what I'd like to see, or is this what I intend to make happen? Right. So a speech act theorist says everything that is uttered, it has an intention to it, and there's different kinds of intentions it may have. And the reason this is sociocultural is because this is not just a psychological process, but these are understood as part of a community, communal. We have conversations always with somebody else. So it's interactive, and we shape others by this, and we're shaped by these. All right, so that's a little bit of speech act theory. And again, when I was in my doctoral studies, there was a professor in our department who was a conversational analyst, a CA specialist. That was her thing. And she would take tape recordings of conversations that people had, and she would take parts that were particularly rich, and then she would just start to take them, diagram them. I don't know if you've ever seen a conversational analysis diagram, but it's like, it has, and then 5-second pause, and then, and then it says, and then it'll have little icons here to indicate something about accent or other. It's highly descriptive, and you look at it, and you're like, wow, that's real. It's got times to it. They take everything apart, and the question becomes, how did these two people coordinate this conversation? What are the rules they're using? How do they know these rules? Where did they misunderstand each other? Let's look at what happened when they misunderstood each other. Was there an utterance that was an elocution, and they just take it apart to an intense degree. And when you do that, by the end of the time, you're really tuned in on how conversations work. And the idea in sociocultural that any conversation that is a understood enactment of communication is a major accomplishment. There were all kinds of rules operating, there were all kinds of understandings, all kinds of cultural things going on, and we just do it. But a sociocultural conversation analyst wants to take it apart to the nth degree and understand it. All right, so why don't we stop and we'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll finish. Girl Scouts are available here. Malted milk balls, chocolate raisins. Anybody staying here? You're going to stay in here? I'm going to walk over then and get something. Because someone's got to watch the camera and all. I got to turn it off.